You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victim's advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we are joined today by Derrica and Natalie Wilson, founders of the Black and Missing Foundation, here to talk to us a little bit about their foundation and the excellent work that they're doing. Derrica and Natalie, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having
us.
Forgive us if we sound like super excited chipmunks. We had met you at CrimeCon and so enjoyed our brief conversation there. And then, of course, we had a chance to learn more about the foundation and the great work you're doing. So we're both over the moon excited that you had time to join us today.
And we're excited to be here.
Yes, thank you. And it's good to see you all again or talk to you again.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and start off a little bit by you telling us about your educational and professional background and what you do in addition to the work that you do with Black and Missing. Natalie, I'll start with you and then we'll kick it over to Derrica.
Okay. I'm Natalie Wilson, co-founder of the Black and Missing Foundation. My educational background is undergrad. I graduated from Howard University in the District of Columbia with a BA in psychology and a minor in communications. And I also have a master's in communications from Trinity University. And most recently, I attended Harvard Business School and got a certificate in strategic planning for nonprofit, and love the work that I do. And everything that I do is really in line with communications. I do have a boutique public relations agency that helps other nonprofit get awareness or exposure for their cause.
Very cool. Derrica, can you tell us a little bit about your end of things?
Absolutely. So my name is Derrica Wilson. I am the co-founder of the Black and Missing Foundation, the other half of the dynamic duo, as we call ourselves. My background is law enforcement. I graduated from the Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Training Academy and went on to pursue my career in law enforcement. I have over 2 decades of law enforcement experience. And recently I left my government job and I actually started doing national security and public trust investigations for the federal government. So I do that with my other business, which is RLD Limited Group, and it focuses on background investigations and law enforcement consulting. And I'm also an author. I wrote my first children's book last January and published it, and it's called Finding Sierra. And it aligns with what I do about keeping our community safe. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, I love this. I had no idea about your book. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Where can we find it if we want to help your book sales?
Oh, thanks. It's available on Amazon, and it's called Finding Sierra. It's a children's book, and it really highlights the dangers of online predators and trafficking. So it's a great tool for parents to have those uncomfortable conversations with their children about the dangers that are out there.
Oh, that's phenomenal, because we've actually had episodes where we've talked about the dangers to young children and even teenagers online and covered some cases involving online predators. Especially our young kids, we really need to make sure that they're aware of the fact that it's a great, big, wonderful world out there, but you've got to be careful. And just because someone presents in a certain way doesn't mean they're being honest about who they are or what their intentions are.
Absolutely. And just last year, I actually received my certification as a certified human trafficking investigator. So again, it aligns with the work with my law enforcement background, as well as the work that we do with the foundation.
And the two of you are sisters-in-law. When we met at CrimeCon, I was saying off the air, I thought you were sisters, but you're actually sisters by marriage. Personally and professionally, it sounds like your lives have blended a bit.
Yes, we're sisters-in-law. Yep. Married to her brother. And I always say this, and I'm going to put it on record. He is the luckiest man on earth.
I don't doubt it.
So tell us a little bit about your organization, the Black and Missing Foundation. Give us a little bit of an overview about its main goals. What are the objectives that you'd like to accomplish with your foundation?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background as to why we started it.
Perfect.
The organization, the inspiration behind it is a young lady by the name of Tamika Houston who went missing. And we read how her family really struggled to get media coverage, particularly national media coverage surrounding her disappearance. And Tamika's aunt, Rebecca, she's in media relations, and she couldn't get her colleagues to not even show her niece on the national programs. Lori Hacken disappeared weeks after Tamika, and she dominated the news cycle. And Rebecca reached out to those same reporters, same networks, same programs, and she was met with silence. So it was really disheartening to us, and we wanted to do some research to see if this was an issue affecting our communities, because we definitely didn't see people that looked like us making the news, whether it's local or national, the news headlines or coverage. And at the time, we found that 30% of all persons missing were of color, primarily Black males, and we decided, why not us? We need to do something about it. Especially right after that, Natalie Holloway disappeared. And I'm sure that when I said her name, you all know her face, you know her story. So we wanted to use our professions, and media relations and exposure is so important for these cases. Derrica's in law enforcement, and helping these families navigate the process with the police department is so important. And if you fast forward to now and close to 15 years, in May, we would be doing this 15 years. We keep going because these families need us, and the numbers continue to grow. Today, 40% of all persons missing are of color. And what we're trying to do is to change the narrative, because we want our missing to be household names too. And bring in my PR background again, I wanted to use my close to 2 decades of experience to really be the publicist for these families, to help them get that national media coverage, because it's so important. One, it alerts the community that someone is missing, but it also puts pressure on law enforcement to add resources to the case. And we see with media coverage, it's a game changer. I remember a case where we took the family on The View, and within 14 minutes of the show airing, we received a tip that led us directly to that missing child.
Wow.
Media coverage is vital. Exposure is so important with these cases.
You've given us some really startling statistics already, and I know that only scratches the surface. Can you talk a little bit about crime rates and solve rates, particularly for people of color? That statistic, 40% of all missing persons are of color, just floored me. Talk a little bit about solve rates if you can.
What I would say is that, number one, time is of the essence. And one of the hurdles that the families face on a day-to-day basis in the Black and Brown community is oftentimes, as Natalie stated, their cases are met with silence, with law enforcement, not really taking those cases seriously, not taking the police report. And if they decide to take the police report, classifying our youth as runaways. We all know that runaways are not receiving the Amber Alert, and quite frankly, there's no sense of urgency in finding them. And when it comes to adults, they like to, and I'm speaking of law enforcement, but law enforcement like to associate their disappearance with some sort of criminal activity. And it really dehumanizes and desensitizes the fact that these are valuable members of our community. So when these cases come to us, again, time is of the essence, and we approach each case the same. We have to get this information out there instantly, regardless of how long that individual has been missing. Once we learn of it, time is of the essence. And we start circulating those flyers on our social media platforms, encouraging the families to circulate the flyers that we create. And let me just take a step back. The reason we create flyers on behalf of these families is because they are taking matters into their own hands when law enforcement is failing them. So on the flyers that they're creating, they're putting their personal information on there. So in addition to dealing with the fact that their loved one is missing, now they're having to deal with those scam and ransom calls because their number is interfaced with the general public and everyone doesn't have great intentions. So we deal with that often. But what we can say is that since our inception, nearly 15 years in the making, we have helped reunite and bring closure to nearly 400 families across this country. Not all cases have that wonderful ending, but there is a sense of, and we don't even like to utilize the terminology closure, but there is some valuable information that the family now has. But I would say that our cases are even half and half of those that we're able to find, reunite, and help families get those resources. And then sadly, there are so many families out there that don't have that same fate.
And I just want to add, one of the things that we see that really impacts recovery, and I hate to say this, but it's really a sad fact that the media and law enforcement, they take some cases less seriously than others, right? So the perception is if you are Black or brown, you're involved with some type of criminal activity, you live in a certain zip code, you don't have the education or the wherewithal. It's really disheartening. And what we are doing is changing the narrative that these are missing mothers and fathers, grandparents, our children, and they're very valuable members of our community. And we need to hold the media and law enforcement accountable, as well as our community. We know that our community plays a major role in all of this. And we all look at the news and we know that there's an inherent trust with law enforcement and the community, but we look like our community and we have platforms available. If someone has a tip or they want to report their loved one missing, they can do so on our platform.
Do you find that your involvement then, it seems like it's very multifaceted. In other words, I think even just involving Black and Missing and your team with a case might help the families understand what steps they need to take to get the word out, as you were talking about how critical the timing is, particularly in the early stages of a missing persons case. I was also wondering if law enforcement have a tendency to step up their game and media people the same, because a professional organization like yourselves have stepped in this advocate, or it's almost like a coaching role, or acting as their PR people.
I can speak from the law enforcement perspective. They are the gatekeepers, and sadly, across this country, missing persons isn't considered a priority. Most police departments, they are evaluated based on how many homicides they can close, their robbery, burglary rates. And so when they look at missing persons, especially adults, they feel these are adults, they can come and go as they please. So there really isn't a lot of resources dedicated to those unique units if they have a missing persons unit. There's oftentimes contact with these police departments across the country. There may be one or two police officers that are assigned to the missing persons area. A lot of them are very forthcoming and very open about the limited resources that they have and the need for our organization to even assist them. They learn about us when we reach out to them, because every case that comes into the Black and Missing Foundation, we have to verify. And I'll use as an example, the other night, I was on the phone with a police department and the detective, I was transferred to the detective, and he was overwhelmed with the fact that here's someone that can further assist him, because they don't have all those resources at their fingertip to create a flyer for that missing person, to disseminate it. And so he asked, could you please share the flyer that you all created? And then I'm going to share that internally until we can get our flyer up. So just being able to position ourselves as allies, we are not trying to step on their toes. We want them to see us as partners, and we want the families to understand that we know how to bridge that gap with law enforcement. So again, it is a benefit for the families for us to be able to walk them through that process, but also with law enforcement to see that here's an organization that has law enforcement experience, so they know how to walk the walk and talk the talk. So I think it's all about building those relationships.
From a media perspective, we have come a long way, but we do have some really strong media partners with pretty much all of the national networks. We have partnerships with reporters. There was a family that we were helping last year, and I remember the family calling the local stations to get coverage for their missing child. And no one would cover it, but we were able to pick up the phone and call that assignment desk editor, and they were able to cover that story. So again, we can't do this work by ourselves, and that media exposure, it's powerful, and it has proven to be very effective. And we have to continue those partnerships with the gatekeepers. Unfortunately, they don't look like us. Primarily, the ones that are making the decision as to who would get coverage, middle-aged white men, right? So they really connecting with our stories. So we are also trying to have diversity in the newsroom. We offer a fellowship and scholarship to our future generations so that they can add their voice to it and have value and tell the stories that matter to our community.
Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the HBO miniseries from 2021. How ultimately did that series come into being, and what were your goals with that series?
Soledad O'Brien, she saw us. We won an award in 2017 with Black Girls Rock, and it was a Change Makers Award. She saw us and she was really intrigued by the work that we do and really around this issue. And she wanted to shed a light on it and really to give a bird's eye view as to the challenges that not only we face, but families face in getting media coverage and law enforcement assistance when their loved one goes missing. And I think that it has been well received. The docuseries won 5 awards, and it has really elevated the organization and the work that we do, because people, meaning institutions like law enforcement, the media, and our community, they are reaching out to us and they're saying, I didn't know this issue existed. How can I help? So that's what we want to see. We want to see more people, our communities, continue to work together to not only find these missing individuals, but let's take a look at the systemic issues that are affecting these individuals, why they're going missing in the first place. Sex trafficking, domestic violence, mental health. These are issues that are plaguing our community and causing individuals to go missing.
If I could just add to what Natalie stated as well, the docuseries, it really gave everyone that bird's eye view into those issues, as she stated. It was also a call to action to help implement change. So we have been working with lawmakers. We're trying to get rid of that classification runaway where everyone is considered missing. Yeah. We're fighting to get rid of that 24-hour waiting period because time is of the essence. And we really challenge our community for their involvement in their respected cities, state jurisdictions to reach out to law enforcement and ask those uncomfortable questions. Do you classify missing as runaway? Do you require families to wait 24 hours? Is there a waiting period before a detective is assigned to the case? Is there a waiting period before the case gets entered into NCIC, which is the National Crime Information Center? So these are some low-hanging fruit that the community members can also ask their respective police jurisdictions. But the docuseries also created great partnerships and relationships for us, as well as Natalie stated, with the media, with law enforcement, even with Stanford University. We actually had a class this past fall that talks about these issues and how we can have advocacy in these groups helping to move the mission forward to help us find us.
You mentioned something earlier, which I think is so critical, which is that 40% of missing people are people of color. And yet I feel like it's only in the last couple of years I've heard any kind of in-depth discussion of the idea of missing white woman syndrome and how certain types of cases, you mentioned the Natalie Holloway case and Gabby Petito, and there's so many other examples of this where the media just goes absolutely bonkers over certain cases, almost always involving missing young white women. And that's a serious, I don't want to diminish somebody because they are an attractive young white woman, but this idea that there seems to be like no balance in terms of the coverage or even the allocation of law enforcement resources. Do you feel like there's any more concrete steps being taken by all of these players to address the fact that we seem to be focusing still on so many cases that involve people who are not of color?
I want to be positive here. White women syndrome exists. Gwen Ifill, journalist, called it out. Most recently, we saw the Gabby Petito case, and she dominated the news cycle. Yeah. And even her father said coverage that they received was unprecedented and it was overwhelming. But there's a sector of our societies that's not getting that media coverage and that press. And that's what we're working to change. When we first started the organization, according to the Urban Institute, only 7% of missing people of color got any type of media coverage at all. And I don't think that number, even though we have been working extremely hard to change it, it has changed a bit, but we still have a lot more work to do. We realize that when our girls are missing, they're often adultified. They're seen as fast or promiscuous, not seen as victims. And what we're trying to do is to change that narrative. They are victims many times because we know that there are more young Black girls that are victims of sex trafficking. And the pimps and pedophiles are saying, you know what, my penalty or punishment wouldn't be as harsh for trafficking a young Black girl. So we really need to take a look at these laws. Going back a bit to the docuseries, we have been invited to newsrooms, national newsrooms across the country. And what we're realizing is there's no policy in place as to how these decisions are made. So a family calls the news station. How do they decide who gets that news coverage? There isn't any policy. So we really have to do a better job and we need to step up to the plate. But again, we all have a responsibility to do that. And we also need to hold our elected leaders responsible. We need to go out there and vote because we need people in office that can make sure that there are processes in place to protect those that are most vulnerable.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
Speaking again at the media for a moment, what are some action steps that the media could be, really more to the point, should be taking to solve the issue of underrepresentation and poor coverage?
One thing that we say is less is more. So less of one individual and more of everyone else evens the playing field. And again, our heart goes out to anyone who has a missing loved one. And we don't want to, them to feel as though that these individuals' lives don't matter or doesn't matter, but it does. But our missing, their lives matter as well. And again, we need to have more diversity in the newsroom, people that look like us that are willing to say, you know what, this story is important and we need to tell it. And again, having those policies and procedures in place where one person isn't making a decision based on ad dollars or ratings. This is a missing person, a valuable member of our community, and their family, their community want them home as well.
I think it's a significant challenge and that needs to be brought up over and over again. And this is where having you as allies with law enforcement and the media, as well as the families that are struggling with trying to locate a missing family member, it has to be so helpful for you to be able to step in and facilitate things. Even something, I think, Natalie, you said something a moment ago about the assignment editor at a particular media outlet. The average American family isn't going to even know what an assignment editor does. Do you find that the fact that you've been there and done that helps in these situations?
Absolutely. My experience in media relations and working with reporters and knowing their deadline and working with many of these reporters and know what beat they cover, it's valuable because, again, I can reach out to them. I've created these relationships and partnerships to help us navigate through this process. But I also coach families as to how to work with the media. It's very overwhelming, it's challenging, and many of them are afraid to have a camera in their face. And then we also need to make sure that they come across a certain way because you want the audience to connect with that mother, right? Whose child is missing. When there's that connection, then meaning the audience will be more prone to want to help that family. So it's definitely a difficult balance, but it's something that we have been prepared for. And we're glad to use our experiences and our training to help these families navigate.
Derrica, as a longtime law enforcement officer, you spent 20 years in law enforcement and now you're consulting and working in other roles. I know there's no secret handshake or anything like that, but you do speak the language of your fellow law enforcement officers. Does it come up fairly early in the conversation if you're talking to, let's say, a law enforcement person you might not have spoken with before? Do you drop the fact that you were a cop for 20 years into the conversation early on?
Oh, absolutely. That's something that needs to be established up front because it's that credibility, the fact that I have served, and it just really helps bridge the gap for the families. Even the questions that we ask the family, our intake form, it mirrors what the police should be asking for. So when we do reach out, we have all of that critical information at our fingertips. It gives them a sense of comfort as well, knowing that this person knows. Like, we can understand some of the struggles that they go through if they don't have the resources. And some of them are quite welcoming. Now, I'm not going to be naive at the fact that one is on board because, of course, law enforcement tends to be territorial. But I will say that over the years, we have built those relationships, and our name and our reputation really speaks to who we are. And at the end of the day, it's not about us. It's about helping these families. We want to end this nightmare for the family. So it's us all coming together, law enforcement, the media, and the community. And we just want to be able to provide them with additional resources and tools to help close this case. Because what I will say with law enforcement as well, with the minority community, there is a lack of trust. And as Natalie mentioned earlier, we look like the community that we're serving. Because there is that lack of trust, oftentimes we receive tips. And when we receive those tips, we share that information with law enforcement so they can further follow up. So again, that's how those relationships build. And as the case that Natalie mentioned earlier in the show, when we took that family on The View and 14 minutes later, that missing child who was missing for 5 months was found, that tip came into the Black and Missing Foundation. It didn't go to the police department. We alerted the police department and shared all of that information. So it really shows the value of our organization and how our community sees us.
That territorial issue that you mentioned, though, I mean, is law enforcement willing to accept the fact that there may be a higher trust level among community members who might have valuable information, that they'd be more comfortable dealing with the Black and Missing Foundation than they would with their local law enforcement agency?
What I will say about that law enforcement being territorial, We can look at cases of missing individuals, and they could be missing from one particular state, and there's reason to believe that they may be in another state. And you have agencies, federal agencies, such as the FBI or the U.S. Marshal Service, who's ready and willing to assist and have a greater reach, only if that local jurisdiction will pick up the phone and ask for that mutual aid. That becomes a tug of war with law enforcement on that local level as well as the federal level. To me, it looks like they're trying to figure out whose guns are bigger. But at the end of the day, it's the families that are really struggling here. So I think with our organization, because we are unarmed, of course, it is a nonprofit, but although I have that law enforcement background, they don't have to sit here and see if my gun is, but it's really connected on that humility and humanity versus that authoritative approach that law enforcement tends to take.
One of the cases that we've covered on the podcast and are committed to continuing to cover is the case of Sage Smith out of Charlottesville here in Virginia, who is a Black transgender woman who disappeared in 2012 in Charlottesville and got very little attention paid, coverage, police resources. You set her against Hannah Graham, a white UVA freshman who disappeared 2 years later and had everything poured into her resources before her search. And we see a really stark difference in the way that the disappearances were handled by the police department. In addition to being a Black woman, of course, you've got Sage Smith being a transgender woman. What are some of the issues that you guys see when you add in the issue of gender and sexuality into the mix with the cases that you're working with?
We remember Sage's case very clearly. I remember working with and talking to her grandmother, and I apologize. It's with transgenders, we're learning as well, whether it's he or she. But I remember talking to Sage's grandmother, and she just wanted answers before she died. And that was one. We too run into challenges with cases like that. The LGBTQ community, their numbers as it pertains to missing persons are much, and we don't believe that anyone is really keeping tabs as to the true number of LGBTQ members of our community that are missing, like Sage. And we do have to do a better job in protecting them.
I feel strongly in the Sage Smith case. I actually still feel, and Kristin and I have covered Sage's case recently, we feel that is a solvable case. And there is a suspect who's a boyfriend of Sage Smith's who went into the wind right after Sage's disappearance. He's never come back to Charlottesville as far as we can tell. But I believe if he's still alive, and I think he is, I think he can be found. Again, this comes down to time, attention, and resources, just as we've seen in my sister's case, the Colonial Parkway murders, and any number of other cases that Kristin and I have covered on the podcast. I still think Sage's case could be solved, but they've got to put some resources into finding this former boyfriend.
I certainly agree. I think that sometimes it either requires a different set of eyes, new lens on the case. How many times have you written an email or a paper and it reads exactly the way you want it to until you press send and you realize you have a typo?
Yes.
It's the same way with a case. You are, especially those that are really invested. You are looking at this evidence. You're looking at all of this information. And it's really, you're trying to put a puzzle together. But sometimes you need someone else to come in. And even with law enforcement, that is the way law enforcement approaches. That's how they approach things within the police department with even cases. Once that officer writes a case, the report, it goes to someone else to review it. And depending on the circumstances of the case, you may have a third reviewer, a second or third reviewer. So I think when you have cases such as this, before it even gets submitted, when there's an open, active investigation, sometimes you just need a fresh set of eyes to take a look and see if there's any holes in it.
And even if you saw the docuseries, the case of Derek Butler, whose sister Pamela was missing, right? He utilized that media relationship, the relationship that he had with reporters, and he kept them abreast of what was going on. They kept Pamela's case in the forefront, and it forced law enforcement to add resources to the case. And as Derrica mentioned, getting that fresh set of eyes. They had a new detective assigned, and the end result is they were able to solve 2 murders because of the fresh set of eyes. So it goes back again to keeping cases like this in the forefront. I am sure the community believes that Sage's case has been solved or some type of resolution, and it hasn't, because there's been no media traction, no awareness, continued awareness around it. So we're not naive to believe that every case will get coverage year round, but sometimes you have to be creative. What can you do to keep this case in the forefront so that there can be answers for the families?
One of the local cases here that is of major concern is missing 4-year-old Cody Bigsby.
Yes.
And he's about to hit the year mark here on January 30th.
Mm-hmm.
So important to keep that case in the media. There have been times when I have looked in the newspaper or checked all the local media listings to see, has there been an update on Cody? And you don't get them nearly as often as I feel like they should be gotten. What are some steps that we as podcasters and really just anybody in the community can do to keep cases like Cody's in the media?
Keep highlighting it around the anniversary. Reach out to the detective to say, hey, do you have an update on this case? I would like to use my voice, my power, my platform to keep the community aware as to the outcome of this case. And once you do that, you will see, I've seen it time and time again with our media partners, when we have a family on the show and they reach out to law enforcement for an update, they start working on the case again. So again, it's just keeping these cases in the forefront, whether it's an anniversary, a vigil, a balloon release, a small bit of information, anything that can keep it in the forefront so that these individuals will be remembered. And the community will know that this individual still has not returned home.
In the Cody Bigsby case, they just announced a vigil, and there seems to be some renewed energy. Sadly, I don't think this case is going to end well, but I do think, and I know one of you mentioned resisting the idea of closure. We also talk about that on the podcast quite a bit. I'm just completely uncomfortable as the brother of a murder victim. There is no closure.
Families say that to us all the time. There's
Sure.
no such thing as closure. You may have answers, but no closure.
Right. Sometimes people will talk about justice, and I think justice seems awfully far off on the horizon as well. And answers is about as comfortable as I can. So sadly, I'm not terribly optimistic in the Cody Bigsby case, but I think that the fact that we do have the 1-year anniversary coming up, Kristin, I think does afford the community an opportunity to really redouble its efforts to getting the word out. There's a possibility that Cody could be somewhere, and one way or another, we need to find out.
I certainly agree with that. I also think, in addition to reaching out to law enforcement and inquiring about their efforts, also inquiring about the Amber Alert. This Amber Alert has been out for so long. The criteria needs to be updated. Cody never received an Amber Alert. Right. So Cody is really not known outside of the Virginia, Richmond, Hampton, Newport News area, not on that national level, because again, he could absolutely be anywhere, but we don't know unless we try. We're hoping for the best outcome for Cody, but at this point, we have to not just think outside the box, we need to remove the box. Cody could be in Florida, he can be in California, he can be in Atlanta. The world around us is not aware of Cody's disappearance, a 4-year-old.
That's very powerful, because you're right. Now, Kristin is in the Williamsburg area, so she sees some of the media coverage around Cody's disappearance, but that wasn't even close to a national story.
No, not at all. And it really should have been. That is definitely something that we are committed to continuing to put forward through our platform. Is we do not have nearly the size platform that you all do, but we definitely want to make sure that Cody's name continues to be out there. Because you're right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're right. We don't know where he could be. And I'm still hoping that there may be a happy ending there for that little boy.
Me too. I wanted to ask you a question, draw a little bit of a line here. I don't want to make it sound like I'm hinting at something in Cody's case. One of the things I was thinking about for these cases that stretch on longer, it certainly feels to us that sometimes you begin to at least consider the possibility that we may be talking about a murder in some of these examples and not a person that's gone missing as the months or years stretch on. Do you find that your role as advocates and supporters, if you will, of the family members, does it begin to change in those examples?
We never want families to give up on hope, and we're not giving up on them as well, because we have seen miracles happen. I think the world has seen miracles happen when you think about the Elizabeth Smart, the J.C. Dugard, and the list goes on and on. These families see that. And these families have seen where we've had cases of individuals that have been missing for quite some time, and we're able to reunite them with their families. So we build our organization solely on hope, because we're not going to give up and we're not going to allow them to give up.
And we want these families to know that they have an ally with us, and we are doing everything that we can to help find their missing loved one. So we hold their hands in many instances. We cry with them. We provide them the resources that they need to uplift themselves and to hold on, because, as Derrica mentioned, we have seen miracles happen where individuals were missing for 10 years and they were able to escape or be found. So we, again, lead with hope and empowerment. But the takeaway here is we can't do this work by ourselves. Someone knows something. And if it's your family member that's missing, you would want the community to get involved and to just hold on to hope that they would be one day reunited with their loved one, or at least have answers.
So how can people who want to support your organization and the good work that you're doing, how can we help you? What can we be doing to make sure that you have the funding that you need and the publicity and the coverage and everything else that you need? What can we do to help? How can we be your allies?
There are a number of ways. I'll start with social media. We need our community, whether or not you are a person of color, to be our digital milk carton. So if you see a profile, you may not know the missing individual, share it with your network. We just need one person to come forward with information to help find them. Since the HBO docuseries and the pandemic, our caseload has increased tremendously. And we need resources. We need funding to help these families, whether it's with flyers. Printing flyers is very expensive.
Yeah.
Designing and printing flyers, financial support. Many times these families can't go to work because they're looking for their missing loved one. They need financial support. And sadly, sometimes when the individual is found, they're found deceased and they need help with burial services. Around the holidays, we provide toys and financial support for families with little ones, because we want them to have a good holiday as well, or Christmas. So just providing support and rallying around these families. They need help. As a community, again, it doesn't matter if you're Black or white, your race, your ethnicity, we can all do something, because this is a pandemic that has been affecting our nation. It's not just the Black community.
So we'll include links to the Black and Missing Foundation in our show notes, and we'll show people how they can donate and show support for the good work that you're doing, as well as some of your social media links. Everything is available at the blackandmissingfoundation.org website as well.
So you can go to bamfi.org. That's a very short URL, bamfi.org.
Perfect. And the docuseries is still available on HBO, correct?
It's streaming on HBO Max. Yes.
Excellent.
And
Please check it out and let us know your thoughts.
We will link to that as well. We'd like to thank Natalie and Derrica Wilson for the outstanding work they're doing with the Black and Missing Foundation and for taking the time to talk with us today on Mind Over Murder. We urge you to support this organization, and we look forward to future conversations with them.
That's going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.